So then I wanted to wrap up with some new technologies too that we've been involved with. I've recently been doing a lot of work in the Northern Everglades with the Nature Conservancy on a program to look at watershed investments to solve a lot of the problems that they have over there, and they've got a lot of them. Not the least of which is a lot of phosphorus that's bound up in the soil. They estimate it's going to take 400 years to wash out the phosphorus in the Northern Everglades to Lake Okeechobee at a rate that's 5 times what Lake Okeechobee can handle. For 400 years, every year, that's the case.
Is that from fertilizer?
It's from fertilizer of improved pasture. Most of the watershed is rural. It's from dairies. They've actually bought out probably 75% of the dairies to just stop that practice completely. And I think a lot of it's from sludge spreading. A lot of the municipalities on both sides of the state haul their wastewater sludge to this area because it's so rural. And that spreading on the land of that material, it's high in nutrients, is, I think, been part of the problem as well. What they're looking at is something called soil inversion, where they basically flip the top 2 feet of soil. And apparently that can be done fairly cost effectively. Some of the other things that have been looked at recently that have shown a lot of promise is something called floating wetlands. And the reason they work so well instead of the littoral zones is, in this case, the roots of the wetlands are actually down in the water column, not the soils. And that's where the nutrients are. So they found that those are very effective. Basically, then they pull those in every 6 to 12 months, take the plants off and put new ones in, smaller ones in. They've been using this down in Naples. John and I were down there, and there's one lake they've had them in for 7 years. A lot of these lake managements, they use something called copper sulfate to reduce algae. And they're starting to find copper in the estuary down there in Naples. So the deal they have with homeowners is, if you put these in, we'll help pay for them, but then you don't use copper sulfate anymore to manage your lake. So it's proven to be a pretty good technology. I think we'll see more of those in the future. But what I'm really excited about is the biosorption activated material, and using that as both a barrier and a soil amendment. And to kind of explain what that's about is the discussion that most of the nutrients are in a soluble form. I think John was saying that. The nitrate moves with the water, and it moves through the groundwater into the stream, into the creek, into the ditch. Basically what's done is a trench is dug parallel to the waterway, and this medium is put into it, and the water has to flow through that before it can get into the stream or the lake. That medium is typically something that has a carbon source. In this case, they just used wood chips. The top foot of soil is covered so you don't even know it's there. This is a pilot project they did. You can see that it was effective in reducing the nutrients, so there's no algae along that part of the bank. Simply wood chips, buried in a trench, like this. Something else that's been used is called biochar. And it's essentially organic material, wood chips, that are burned through a process called pyrolysis. They're heated without oxygen. So instead of turning to ash, the organic material turns to charcoal, pure carbon. So you've heard of a carbon filter for water. That's essentially what this is. It's extremely effective in absorbing nitrogen and phosphorus and holding water. This is from a test that was done, shows incredible reductions with the biochar, even better than the wood chips for phosphorus in particular. It's also completely organic because it's made from organic waste. So the entire, I think almost the entire organic waste stream that's going to the landfill could be diverted to this to make this soil amendment. And where it comes from is they discovered it in South America along the Amazon. It was called terra preta. And basically, a lot of the ancient civilizations used to burn their waste in the ground. They don't know if they did it for heat or to get rid of it, but it ended up forming a very rich soil. And some of the early populations that were reported by the Columbus-era explorers just talked about these big civilizations along the Amazon River, but normally the soils would not support the kind of food that would be required. But then they found these deposits along that corridor, and they realized that with that they could probably grow the type of food that would sustain the population. So it's a pure source of carbon. It's organic material. One of the characteristics of it when you put it under a microscope is it has huge pores. Those actually have a positive charge that attracts nutrients, it attracts microbes, and attracts and holds water. This material has recently been certified organic, so a lot of the organic farmers are interested in this right now to use it as a soil amendment. It needs to be what you call inoculated with compost to build it up, because initially it will attract the nutrients. But the tests, and even the University of Florida, most of the universities are looking at this now, and what they're seeing are better yields, faster yields of just about everything that has biochar put into it. So, and it's sequestering carbon at the same time. There's a company that's doing a project in Louisiana. It'd be great to get them into Florida, the northern Everglades. But basically, they take the organic waste, run it through the process. They pull off the fuel that comes out of that process. The byproduct is the biochar, and that's recycled back into the soils. And the whole project ends up being carbon negative. So I close with this. This is what I see on all the construction sites still. And they'll probably put this up in flames. This stuff is really valuable. We've lost it on the soil. That's a desert now with fill. They've cleared and cut what took centuries to make, soil and organic matter that doesn't need fertilizer and water, that can move it, through a natural system. So the opportunity is there. The opportunity is there to have healthier soils, to have pure, cleaner water, using a lot of really passive and cost-effective techniques. And the state has really started to embrace this now as well, in terms of grants for agriculture in particular, we're starting to see. So that's really the overview I wanted to provide. I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions?
I have noticed a number of times there is a discussion about using deep well injection to dispose of sewage. And it seems to me that they're putting this toilet water right into the aquifer. And I wonder if you could comment on that a little bit, how that somehow is okay.
Yeah, that's seen as a last resort for disposal of treated reclaimed water. It's not raw wastewater. The highest priority is to recycle it for irrigation. Other utilities are still probably at times dumping it into the waterways. So it's probably the second alternative is to, now they have to put it down below the aquifer where you pull out your drinking water. And there has to be a confining unit, a layer that does not allow the water to migrate from one aquifer to another. And they have to do all kinds of well testing and borings and tests to make sure that's the case before they get a permit to do it. City of Sarasota just got a permit to do it. And I will tell you, because I work with Lakewood Ranch, we are negotiating with the City of Sarasota to purchase just about all of the reclaimed water they can provide to reuse it for irrigation of landscapes out there. The city has a permit to discharge water into the bay. as an alternative when it gets real wet, they would prefer, as a second alternative, to put it into the deep well.
And they've been spraying for years now.
On High Hat, that lease is up, and
Right.
Lakewood Ranch is saying, we'll give you money for it.
So Steve, just following up on that, in addition to treated wastewater, different systems that do RO and other water treatment end up with brine. And they also are required to inject that below the aquifers that we use as potable water sources.
Correct.
Now, when they go to Warm Mineral Springs and Little Salt Springs, they find water entering those spring systems at different depths and different temperatures. It's not just one big aquifer. Are the people that are permitting these wastewaters at deep aquifers taking into account the potential that heavily mineralized water that would appear in a place like Warm Mineral Springs could, in theory, receive water from these injection sites?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to it.
The other thing I wanted to ask before you brought that up was, it seems like they find charcoal from anthropological sites that are 20,000 years old. So is it safe to assume that this char, the biochar that we're putting in the ground, is really long-term sequestration? It's not going to break
Yes.
down or go away?
Yes.
Okay, that's great.
Yes.
Marjorie?
Hi, I just wanted to ask, where does one get this biochar?
Oh, man, they're selling a lot of them in California.
Just go to California.
Yeah. So I've seen one place. I've heard of one place in Florida. You might be able to find it at Home Depot or Lowe's. I haven't tried yet.
I think that's easier.
Yeah, it would probably just be called biochar, or it might have some similar name, but it'd be a bag like probably where compost normally is. Or you can make it.
But you need pressure to make it.
Well, yeah, you can make it in a paint can. You go on YouTube, you'll see. You can't make a great quantity of it, but I tell you, it's something. If there was, I would invest in it if there was a package.
So Steve, you mentioned that it would take a long time to go through all these layers of soil and then it gets into the aquifer. But I noticed, especially in North Florida and the Peace River, because they've done so much groundwater mining, that the water table has gotten so low that surface water now goes in what were the springs, and now you have like the Peace River just going underground. How is that affected? I mean, if you have all this surface water which is untreated, and as Jono said, the aquifers are, sometimes it's 25,000-year-old water and sometimes it's 2-day-old water. And they're all mixing underground. How has that affected the quality of water?
The aquifer system, I can't emphasize this enough, is really, really complex. In Sarasota County alone, if you think about them as layers of a cake, with the icing being clay that prohibits the movement of water from one layer to the next. However, there's fractures periodically in that icing. So there are places where the water can move in between. Sarasota County has essentially 5 layers, 5 aquifers that are that water is pulled from for drinking water. The one below that, or even deeper, is where the deep wells go, the injection wells. So we have so knowing where all those fractures are, knowing how thick, because those layers vary from one spot to another as you go across. But there's been a lot of work by the USGS over the years. It's relatively well mapped and understood, but it's still pretty mysterious. And I will pretend, my 2 partners are both hydrogeologists. It takes 2 of them to make up for 1 hydrologist. I can tell what's happening on the surface, but below the ground, it takes a real special expertise. My partners are really good at that. They can probably answer better.
I have a question. If we restore some of these natural waterways, will we restore the Myakka River to what it once was?
I don't know.
Do you think it's possible?
Yeah, I mean, go on Google Earth and look at the Kissimmee River, okay? From Lake Kissimmee to Lake Okeechobee, the middle third has been restored. The canal is gone. You can see it as, looks like a grass travelway, but all of the meanders are there still. The floodplain's there. You can, John and I are talking about going on a tour of it, because the Water Management District that did the restoration has $50,000 for free tours of what they've restored, and no one's taken them up on it. But it's phenomenal. I mean, nature will come back. If you give it a chance, it's very resilient. And everything I'm hearing about that restoration is saying, just like the celery fields, all we did there was basically add water where it used to be, and the wildlife was back almost overnight. In South Venice, we took the muck, this water had no oxygen in it. We got hip waders on and cleaned it out. Within days, it had minnows and frogs and birds, and people saw a return on their investment that quick. That's the return they were looking for their effort. Nature can come back and give it a chance. That's what I've seen, and I think if what's happened on the Kissimmee River is any indication, you know, we're blessed with the Myakka River because it has not been severely ditched like that river was.
With our, a lot of us have residential wells
Yes.
that we're using for irrigation or for drinking.
Yeah.
Where are those, where does that well water come from?
That typically a domestic well is has to go below the first confining unit, and so the water. If you have a septic tank, that water can't get down to that aquifer because we have the Venice clay that is a pretty severe block. Pretty much those wells, your individual well for irrigation or drinking water, those are the only wells in that aquifer. All the other wells for agriculture or for the city of Venice, the Carlton, are in the much deeper aquifers.
So how deep is the ones that are used to residential?
It varies where you are in the county, but I would say typically 120 feet, somewhere in that range. You're required to go below the first confining unit. Yeah, the first layer that restricts water from the superficial. So the water that falls from the sky cannot get down to, believe it or not, where your drinking water is. There's something that limits it. So if you have a septic tank, that water can't migrate down to where your drinking water well is. A lot of people that have well and septic wonder that a lot, you know.
I have a question about the copper sulfate. Is that the chemical that is put into the ponds and lakes for people to get rid of algae and duckweed, which is mistaken for algae? It's my understanding duckweed is actually a beneficial water plant.
Yeah.
And yet people kill it off all the time with copper sulfate.
Could be. You'd have to talk to the lake management people what they're using for. It's typically used for algae.
Okay. Okay. We got a couple of people who haven't asked questions so far.
I want to thank you first for all the information you've given us. I'm not at all involved in the environmental programs, and it's been really interesting, but a tremendous amount of overwhelming information. And as a layperson, I'm trying to absorb this, and I'm saying to myself, there's so many people, like I live in the Indian Beach area, we have watersheds there, and we have so many committees, and no one's ever discussed this. It doesn't seem like anybody's interested, or they just don't know how to do any of this. What can we do for this?
Well, John is beginning this project with two primary focal points. And if they're successful and the community gets engaged in it, it's my hope that this will be expanded to being more county-wide And as the information becomes available, the community will participate and take the leadership to pursue these things. Don't
It
you?
only takes one to start.
But Kathy,
Yes.
he or anybody can go to the county hall.
Yes.
Okay. We actually have a capital project in Indian Beach, Sapphire Shores that's coming up to put swales in the neighborhood to reduce the stormwater runoff. So I can give you information about that if you want. I'll give you my contact information.
Steve, you mentioned that the water supply with that new reservoir that went in
Right.
Charlotte County. In today's Englewood Sun, there was a headline that, and I'm not every not every government agency has a share of that.
Correct.
One of them announced that they're going to run out of water in 2029.
Which one?
I ran out of the house before my husband could read the paper, so I couldn't grab it. But it was one of it was either Port Charlotte or somewhere.
Oh, you know what? I'll bet it's Punta Gorda. I don't know. Punta Gorda, I know, it has their own reservoir. On that map, I was showing with all those circles, blue, and there were also lines between. And what Peace River has spent a lot of time doing, not just for the 4 counties that are members, but for all the utilities, is interconnecting everything. And I know there's plans to run an interconnect to Punta Gorda, for example. They've interconnected Northport, so that with all that water Peace River has, they would like nothing more than to be able to sell that to somebody that's running out. Because they paid a lot for that water, they're paying off the bond, we're paying off the bonds, and the more water they can sell that they have extra, the better.
Isn't the truth that there's plenty of water over Florida? It's the way it's used.
Yeah, the way it's stored. And by the way, on agriculture, Florida is one of the leading food producers in the country, along with Texas and California. California, what's happening out there right now is frightening. Texas, until recently, was in a drought. Okay. We work all over the state. I will say that we have seen in the last 2 years a lot of investment coming into Florida to buy ag land. And I am convinced that these are like large investment companies. They're doing it as an investment. And I'm convinced they're not doing it to buy homes. Their intent is to keep it in agriculture. A lot of it is citrus or form of citrus. I don't know if they're going to keep on growing citrus or do something else. But it is a commitment to agriculture. Florida is seen, and I think largely because we're seen as water rich, which